Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the first in the Conservative Party of Canada leadership race 2022 videos. Now, unlike the Ontario series or the French series right now, I don't know how many updates this is going to get because polling for leadership race is much more sporadic than the polling for a full-on election. I do hope to update as often as there is interesting polling. Like if Poilievre stays as dominant on the field, I might not do many updates on it, but we'll see. I'll get into what's going on with Atkinson and Baber and any other candidates as well later. One other thing to note, so this just as a general channel update here, since I'm covering more things or doing more weekly videos now, or I'm going to attempt to going forward, I'm going to make it clear what the update schedule is going to be. So Sunday normally is going to be reserved for the primary election that's being covered, and the primary election is the one that is closest to election day. So right now it's France, but after France, it'll be Ontario. If I have videos coming out on Tuesday, it would be a secondary election I'm covering, which in this case is Ontario because it's farther away to election day. I don't think I'm going to cover more than 2 elections at once because I just don't have enough time. And to be frank, I can only cover elections that I know a relatively decent amount about the politics of the country involved, or else I don't have any interesting commentary to say, and there's only so many hours in my day. I cannot follow every country yet. And then if I have any other additional videos, they will probably be coming out on Thursdays, maybe Fridays, depending. There is going to be some exceptions to this, like the French video this week came out on Friday instead of today, because I want it to be out well in advance of election day, but try to grab, well, not well in advance, but I want it to be out before election day occurs, and I want it to contain as many polls as possible, and the compromise then was a Friday release, given my work schedule. That all said, let us dive into the Conservative leadership race. So first over foremost, before I go into any details of dissecting it, let's just talk about where we are right now. So Poilievre is absolutely dominating the field, and I will note here, I haven't got it working quite yet because I'm not quite happy with how I'm doing individual ridings, like how the percent votes are working out individual ridings yet, and I'm going to iron that out going forward. But I didn't really feel like it needed to be holding up this video because, as seen here, Poilievre is about 58%, so it doesn't actually matter exactly how I'm calculating the percentages per riding, because Poilievre will just win on first ballot no matter what with this amount of support. The reason why I am not sure how I want to calculate the percentages for ridings is because I don't have a good idea of the amount of voters in every single riding that are going to actually vote in the Conservative leadership race, which is particularly relevant in places like Quebec and lesser extent in Atlantic Canada, where it is not uncommon for ridings to have less than 100 people in it, so they don't actually count as 100 points. That said, at the moment it's not particularly relevant, but I am going to look at it, and if I can figure out a working solution, I will update this. So not only will, instead of listing quote-unquote ridings 1, I'll be listing points instead. But for now, since I don't have a good methodology for how to do points yet, I am listing this as the number of ridings where this candidate is the leading candidate. I hope that makes sense. So, what can we tell so far, just on a superficial level, from this election? No, before we go into that, sorry, I will just address the Atkinson and Baber issue. They are approved candidates right now. Not I believe it's called approved and not verified. I could be mixing the two up. But they haven't been separately polled in the available polls on the matter. So we have like Ledger and Ledger and an Angus Reid poll that give you by province / region and various demographics. Baber and Atkinson were not asked as candidates in those polls, so they will 100% be getting votes, assuming they cross the $300,000 threshold. But I don't know how. I can't forecast them because the polls just don't exist. There was one poll that had, I believe, Atkinson in it, where he was listed as 6% among conservative voters. Great. But I can't actually do anything with just telling me 6% nationally. Like, I can't, my model doesn't work if you only give me that number. I need more data than that for it to make a result that means anything. So, yes, these two 100% will have votes if they make it to the verified stage. They presently don't have votes because I don't have anything to compare them against. I have no data for them. So, for now, we're just going to look at these top 4 candidates. And that's where I'm going to focus on. Once Baber and Atkinson actually have separate polling data, and I can actually forecast them properly, and I can actually see where they are and where their support is, I'll start talking about them. But for now, since I have just a complete dearth of data, nothing I can do about it. That said, of the 4 candidates that do have anything relevant-wise, the top 4 here. So the one that doesn't need discussion is just Poilievre. He just completely dominates everywhere. And the only places where other candidates are sneaking in are Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, and BC, where there's enough seats, enough ridings that it's not difficult for one candidate to be leading one of them. Or in the case of Quebec, 13. But overall, Poilievre is just completely oppressing the entire field in his dominance right now. And frankly, looking at the polling, looking at the media available for his campaign and for other campaigns, I don't think there is a good argument that will change anytime soon. I'll be very surprised, and I will just one moment address here. These colors are they have no significance at all. They're just completely meaningless. I've picked arbitrary colors, so don't read too hard into the color choices I have. They're just arbitrary. With that said, now let's start actually dissecting the race. So I'm going to focus primarily on, in this case, the top 3 here who have double digits. So, and even more so on Charest and Poilievre, because they're the 2 who get almost all the media attention. Lewis gets a little bit, but not much, and Brown pretty much only gets media coverage in relation to Poilievre or Charest. So, and frankly, at the moment, he's getting way more media coverage than his support level even suggests is relevant. But we'll see going forward. So, this is superficial understanding of this race right now among the quote-unquote mainstream media, that the race is between the quote-unquote true blues and the quote-unquote moderates of the party. The moderates being Charest and Patrick Brown, and the quote-unquote true blues being Poilievre, with Lewis being the social conservative candidate. However, I don't think this is a good understanding of the race. Like, it has some superficial merit in that, yes, Charest and Brown seem to be more moderate than Poilievre on socioeconomic issues, and in a lot of ways are much more moderate than Lewis, though Lewis herself isn't that extreme. Like, yes, she's pro-life, but her level of pro-lifeness in the US would get you laughed at, for example. And in fact, compared to places in Europe, if she got her way and did everything that she's currently publicly said, we would still have more progressive, for example, abortion laws than most of Europe. So she's socially conservative, but it's a very moderate version of social conservatism. And not that there's anything wrong with Lewis. I'm not going to focus too much more on her here because there's just not much to talk about because she's not getting much media coverage. And the campaign doesn't really seem to be focused around her. It really seems to be the discussion of Charest versus Poilievre. And more specifically, there's this understanding and this idea perpetuated by the moderates of the party and mainstream media and liberals that the Conservative Party needs to move towards the center to win, with Charest being the quote-unquote anointed candidate for that. Charest supporting a carbon tax, supporting the OIC ban, or supporting might not be the right word, but not wanting to repeal it, as just two examples of places he is moderating socially, with the intention of trying to stay true conservative on more economic issues, though arguably carbon tax is almost entirely an economic issue. Carbon tax is definitely one of the lines where it's kind of blurring. It's social because like climate change, but also economic in that it's literally tax policy. So there's this idea, though, that the Conservative Party needs to move towards the liberal position on social issues, primarily, in order to win. In other words, people like Charest, people in the media, not all the media, but some of the media, are arguing that the Conservative Party be more successful as socially liberal but fiscally conservative. Now, you can argue possible contradictions in what most people who most self-described socially liberal policies do involve a lot of government intervention and fiscal monetary spending. Like, if you have socially liberal stance on abortion in that you have taxpayer-funded abortion, that's quite a bit of money being spent, which some people could argue is not very prudent. Or you talk about social liberal on guns, i.e. buying back guns. That's definitely not fiscally prudent. That's a huge, colossal consumption of money, regardless of the efficacy of the policy itself. It is just a colossal use of money. So you can't even argue it's fiscally conservative at all. It's a complete contradiction. You can't be fiscally conservative and want gun buybacks. It's just so much money, it breaks the stance. And you could even argue that being fiscally like a proper fiscal conservative being 100% for the healthcare system we currently have in Canada is a bit of a contradiction, because the healthcare system we currently have. Now, this is not to say that you cannot have a healthcare system that is single payer and completely opposed to a fiscally conservative position. But the one we currently have does not jive with it, because the problem with the one we currently have is it's basically just a bottomless money pit. So even on that basic of a thing in Canada, it's difficult to argue from a pure fiscally conservative standpoint that you can accept the social liberal position here. So there is that contradiction to be discussed. And there's also this strange naivety, I pronounce that really strangely, that the Liberals represent the center of the political spectrum in Canada, so that moving towards them could take some of their votes away and the Conservatives could win. The problem with that is the voting. So this boils down to something I've been saying several times now. Electoral politics is so much more complicated than left and right. Yes, if we simplify it super heavily, you have the NDP on the most left, then the Greens, then the Liberals, then the Conservatives, then the Bloc, then the Conservatives, then the PPC, federally. That is the overly simplified left-right. But this overly simplified left-right, in a lot of ways, doesn't make sense. And you can see this in 2021. The Green Party, for example, lost 4 percentage points in popular vote. Where did a lot of them go? A lot of them went to the People's Party, and a lot of them went to the Conservative Party. In a absolutist left-right understanding, the Greens shouldn't be going that way, but a lot of them did. A lot went to the NDP, don't get me wrong, and some probably even went to the Liberals. I don't have the math off the top of my head, but huge percentages went to the Conservatives and the People's Party. Way higher than you would think from the simplified left-right spectrum. It's just obviously not true. You look at some of the leadership polling for the Conservative Party here. NDP voters are more likely to favor Lewis over Poilievre. By any metric, Lewis, on paper, should be further to the right of Poilievre. But there's some intricacy there that I cannot think of off the top of my head, other than maybe abject pandering because she's black. Like, abject woke pandering. That would make the NDP voters more likely to support Lewis over Poilievre. That's the only thing I think of, and it's not a great explanation. It's possible. Not a great one. But again, it shows that there's more complexity there in how people vote than this absolutist left-right spectrum. And the fallacy that, quote-unquote, moderating the Conservative Party in and of itself is going to get more voters is that you erode the position of the Liberal Party so the Liberals defect to the Conservatives. The problem with this idea is you also going to lose Conservatives, and there's no guarantee that moderating the party is going to take Liberals, and there's no argument that the policy circle even works like that. Who are the second choices for most Liberal voters? This polling doesn't happen often, but I believe it's normally the NDP are the second choice, overwhelmingly. And then somewhat to the Greens, somewhat to the Bloc. The Conservatives are quite low on second choice for Liberal voters. In the last polling I had, I can't quote specific numbers because it's first off old enough that it's probably not. The number itself doesn't have much meaning, and second, I just don't remember off the top of my head because I can't remember every single number. So the Liberal to Conservative swing voter is a very small percentage of the Liberal Party. And it seems that it's getting smaller over time, which to anybody who's paying attention to Canadian politics, it should be obvious that this is happening. The Liberal Party is further to the left now by any metric, socially, fiscally, on any policy you can name, than Chrétien. So it makes perfect sense that their voter base has shifted to the left. And if their voter base is more left-wing, even in this absolutist scale, which I don't like, it makes sense that you're going to get less of their supporters, because it's not like if we have a scale from 0 to 7, with 7 being People's Party and 1 being the NDP, it's not 2 Green, 3 Liberal, 4 Bloc, 5 Conservative, 6 PPC. Oh, it shouldn't be 7. 1 to 6, 0 to 6. It's not neatly spaced like that. It's probably like, there's probably I would describe it as there's a gap in the middle. So it's not 3, 4, 5 for Liberal Bloc Conservatives. Probably more like 2.2, 3, 5. Like there's a quite a big gap between the Canadian left wing and the Canadian right wing. Even the moderate wings of both these parties have quite a big gap. There's a constant discussion on online places like, for example, Canada subreddits, which are typically more left-wing skew, not entirely, but typically. There's often a discussion talked about from left-leaning Canadians, like Liberal or NDP supporters. Why does Michael Chung stay in the Conservative Party? He's so much more moderate than quote-unquote Poilievre or quote-unquote Lewis, and I say quote-unquote because I don't think it's a fair description to say either of those two are particularly extreme. And the reason for that isn't that Chung is an idiot or anything like that, or Chung is selfish, or he's cynical and doesn't want to lose a seat or lose his position. It has nothing to do with that on paper. I'm sure there might be some consideration of that, because there's always some consideration of that in politics, but the primary overriding thing for someone like Chung is that, yeah, he's a moderate conservative, but he's a gulf away from the Liberals. Even on social issues, if let's say he supports carbon tax, and I don't know for certain if he does these things, so I'm just asserting for sake of argument. Let's say he supports carbon taxes. Let's say he supports gun bans. Let's say he supports giving free dental and pharmacare to everybody. Free. Taxpayer-funded dental care and pharmacare to everybody. Let's say he supports all those things. The biggest thing here is, by any metric, Chung is a fiscal conservative. And the rampant spending of the Liberals is just something that someone like that can't support. Now, it's definitely more complicated than that, and I don't think it's even fair to say that all these assertions of things that, let's say, he supports. I would argue he probably doesn't support most of those positions, but again, I don't know. I've not talked to Chung myself. But the point of this is there's a very large gulf. And the naive idea that moving the party slightly to the left, or more towards the center, is going to gain a meaningful quantity of voters as a given is silly. It could happen. I cannot discount that moving the party's position, regardless of which direction you move it, might gain voters. That is a truism. If you move the party's position, it might get more voters. This is always true. But to assert that a lot of people in the media do, or even in Charest's campaign, that doing such is guaranteed to get more supporters, is completely naive. We have a perfect example. By any metric you can name, Andrew Scheer's 2019 campaign was further to the right than Aaron O'Toole's campaign. Any metric. O'Toole got fewer votes in both raw number and vote share. He even lost seats in every single urban area that mattered. Lost seats in Vancouver. Lost seats in Toronto. Technically, I guess he didn't lose seats in Quebec City or Montreal. He had no seats in Montreal. But he also lost seats in Calgary. He lost seats in Edmonton. So 4 of the 7 largest urban areas, he lost seats. One of those, he couldn't possibly have lost seats in, Montreal. And the other 2, Quebec City is one of the most conservative cities in Canada. To think that you're going to see the Conservatives lose much ground there, even with a very weak campaign, is kind of laughable. And in Ottawa, what seats is he going to lose? Poilievre? Poilievre is one of the most liked politicians on a riding level in Canada. It's just laughable that Poilievre's seat would be meaningfully affected by the national campaign after he's been in office for so many years. So in every single urban area, he could reasonably lose seats. He lost seats. This is not to say that moderate conservatism will do bad in urban areas. It is to say that, quote-unquote, moderating the Conservative Party is not a path to getting votes in and of itself. What matters more here isn't if the party's moderate or extreme or just generic. The leader and the campaign have to inspire people to vote. And the big issue with the idea to quote-unquote moderate the party is the party's current loyal base of donors and volunteers aren't the moderate wing. Moderate conservatism in Canada, in the US, in the world, is a dying breed. And again, I'm defining moderate conservatism as fiscally conservative but socially centrist. They're not necessarily socially liberal, but they're definitely not socially conservative at all. Completely disavow. Socially centrist, economically conservative. That's the quote-unquote moderate conservative faction. This breed of conservatives in the whole world are dying. And there's a very clear and easy reason why this breed of conservatives is dying. And you can see this in the conservative leadership race very clearly. It's a generational change. Charest's vote share, about 15% here of the total vote forecast for the election, overwhelmingly skewed to old people. Specifically 55 plus. Oopsie daisies. That was my code. I wanted to check something because I forget numbers off the top of my head. And this is a case where numbers actually matter. Bear with me here. Boop. Yeah. So Charest has about 15% of the total vote, but he gets 22% of 55 plus and only 7% among under 34s. Overwhelmingly tilted towards the older people. Conversely, the energetic side of the conservative faction, globally, in the US, Britain, France, is young. In the case of Poilievre, Lewis is even more of a clear example of this, but we're going to go with Poilievre first. Poilievre has 58% nationally, but he gets 63% of those 35 to 54. 61% of those under 34. Lewis, who has about 17% nationally, if we round up. Those numbers... Wait a minute. Huh. Oh, never mind. I'm apparently just not able to read. So she gets 16.59% of the vote nationally, 17% among under 34s, 13-ish% among 5 to 54, 9% among 55 plus. Don't ask me how that math works out. Apparently it does. Because the computer can't do the math wrong. This is the same code I've used in every other election, and I've not had a big miss, so we're assuming the math works out somehow. The point here, and it's a very important one, this is a generational divide we're seeing. And there's a very big reason for why this generational divide is happening. And there's a very important reason why 55 is this inflection point. People who are 55, the bottom of this age range, they were growing up in the 70s. One second. I want to get the exact year. They were growing up, they were born in 67. They grew up through the 70s and 80s. The time when socially conservative worldview was dominating culture, when fiscal conservatism was all good and well, and the left was in decline. In particular, the under 34 demographic in all jurisdictions, the propensity to vote for any particular candidate might change. Like in the US, the under 34s don't vote Republican very often. But of the under 34s who vote Republican, they're overwhelmingly more socially conservative than older generations, and are much more politically active, typically, relative to their population share. The younger generations, and the younger you are, the more extreme this is. If you go to millennials, go to Zoomer, it's more extreme still. They grew up in a time period where the left of the world, but most specifically the West, and more even specifically the Anglosphere, has been eroding existing cultural values, institutions, and has been putting change through PC culture, woke culture, cancel culture, all these kind of things. Just as another allusion to the US, you see this in the big spat over the parental rights and education bill in Florida. But I won't get too much into that. There's a huge divide here. And it's no surprise that Poilievre gets more support from young people and Charest gets more support from the older people. Same thing with Lewis. Pat Brown doesn't have enough support for it to really have the differentiation by age group to be statistically significant. It's not a surprise that this is happening with these particular candidates. It is extremely obvious, or not extremely obvious, extremely clear. Canadian young conservatives are tired of the left winning socially. That's the entire story. It's the entire story everywhere. There's no appetite for millennials, Zoomers, possibly even Gen Xers, but that's a more iffy kettle of fish. They're like the dividing line generation. There's no appetite for the quote-unquote moderate conservative, because the view among people of this demographic is that a moderate conservative is someone who just surrenders on issues that matter, because in the end, you get spending under control for a couple of years, then you leave office and the left comes in, because it will always happen. You only stay in office for maybe a decade at most, and then they blow out all the money again. So that's a fiscal restraint is kind of a never-ending battle. So promising you're going to do it is kind of meaningless. It's not a long-lasting thing. But then, as just one poignant example, you capitulate on something like the Order in Council firearms ban, and you let that go through when you have the option to repeal it. Well, those guns are now been taken. The people have lost those items. That right is gone. You could fight it. You could get it back, but they're not interested in fighting it back. Charest is not interested in repealing it, even if, let's say, the confiscation occurs before the next election happens. Charest's not interested in undoing the ban and compensating owners who've had their properties taken from them against their will. He's not interested in that. He's given up. He's ceded the ground. And it's actions like this that have alienated the quote-unquote moderate conservative faction from younger voters. It's not that they're actually... The issue isn't that conservatives are too extreme. And I will contend strongly that a Canadian conservative leader, like Poilievre, who has a strong, articulate vision, he can be against carbon tax. He can be against the OIC. For crying out loud, he could probably even support restrictions on abortion. Not that I think he is, but for the sake of argument, he could be. And as long as he articulated strongly and defended himself, I think he would probably win. The problem that happened to O'Toole, in which the party, if it decided to go for someone like Brown or Charest, risks falling into again, is the voter base was completely and utterly demoralized by actions on the campaign trail and prior to the campaign trail that O'Toole took, supporting basically carbon tax 2.0, subtly rebranded, but nonetheless still the same beast, and supporting to saying he's not going to repeal the OIC. These two things hurt his credibility. You can see it in the 2021 election. O'Toole's winning. Up until Trudeau hits him with the gun attack, O'Toole surrenders 2 days later, and his vote share plummets. His vote share didn't plummet because Trudeau attacked him. People in Canada, voters in general, are not morons. They would have read it. Some of them would have read the budget. Not the budget, sorry, the platform. Some of them would have friends who did it and would have talked to them about it. And the media already covered it, that he was going to do it. So anyone who cared about the OIC already wasn't going to vote for O'Toole. So he gained nothing from it. He lost ground. And that's the same issue with this idea in the Conservative Party that Charest, going a more moderate wing, or perhaps Brown for the same argument, could gain more voters. Yes, I think it's very plausible both of these candidates will gain voters from the left, some liberals, maybe some Greens, maybe some NDPs, maybe some Bloc. But any gains to be made are going to be completely overshadowed by the losses in volunteers, in donations, and in votes from the mainstream wing of the Conservative Party. And importantly, from the youth wing, i.e. the future of the party. There's a reason why the People's Party is overwhelmingly young. It's the exact same reason. There's also a reason why Poilievre, who has campaigned exclusively on his authenticity as being an actual conservative who will fight these battles, is set to completely gut the People's Party. It's the exact same cause. This is the underlying thing going on right now in conservative politics. Canada is a bit behind on the times, and the party, the leadership, the intellectuals, haven't realized that where the grassroots is. And will they realize that? It's hard to say. But it is no surprise to anyone who's looked into this, who's studied this, who looks at this kind of stuff for a living, or I guess in my case, for the enjoyment of a few hundred people on YouTube. Good on all you for watching this. It's no surprise to anyone that O'Toole lost vote share, that his Q4 donation numbers, fundraising numbers, were lower than the Liberal Party, which is rare to begin with. It's not a surprise. He demoralized his core part of the base. And in fact, up until O'Toole was removed as leader and this campaign started, I think there was a very high probability that the party was on the verge of completely splitting in half. But possibly, for the luck of the Conservative Party, the trucker protest came at the right time to get the momentum and the energy required to remove O'Toole, and has allowed the party the chance to correct that branding mistake. And let that not be said. I don't want to belabor this point too much more, because this video is already getting much longer than I normally want to go, but there was not really a good place to cut this. This is just kind of a long argument that I had to articulate here. But parties have brands. Parties are the superstructure. They're like the facade of a grassroots. A party without its grassroots will crumble, as a facade without its framing will fall apart. But similarly, a grassroots with a facade, or a skeleton that has its facade changed dramatically, can also fall apart. Not because the skeleton breaks, but because the building is different now. So in other words, that analogy might be a bit in the weeds, but changing the brand of your party is going to alienate your core voters. An election is about as much winning by getting the most votes, by spreading your message and widening your tent, as it is about actually getting your tent to vote. My hypothesis, which sadly I cannot test, is the Conservatives lost 2021 because their voters stayed home. It should be no surprise. It is very clear. The vote share went down. The raw vote numbers went down. Overall turnout went down. The only people who gained vote share are the People's Party, so some of the Conservatives probably went to the People's Party. And a lot of them stayed home. The Liberals didn't gain it. The Greens didn't gain it. The Bloc didn't gain it. People's Party gained some, but not enough to explain the difference. A lot of it is the Conservative voters stayed home. And the party now is in a contest to decide its future. That is what this race is. This isn't a normal leadership race where you're just trying to decide which face in a suit is the next face in the suit to go. This contest is about the very future of what the Conservative Party of Canada should be. And while Pierre Poilievre is completely and utterly dominating right now, I would not be surprised that if another moderate takes power, the party crumbles. That said, it seems exceedingly unlikely right now, barring Poilievre murdering a baby in his campaign, that could even happen. So, it seems the party, the grassroots, understands this issue better than the punditry class and better than a lot of their leadership candidates. That the soul of the party, what the best strategy forward, isn't to moderate for the sake of moderating. It's to have a clear and articulate difference to the Liberals. That all said, I hope you enjoyed the video. This is more of a video essay than my normal videos. I tried to keep this as succinct as possible, but you can only explain a concept as shortly as you can explain a concept. If you liked this, please like, share, and subscribe. Comment below if you think my analysis is spot on, if it's wrong, if you disagree with me. Though I will note, if you disagree with me, I would just like you to I don't need an essay, but just give me a good articulate reason why you disagree and where, and we can have a conversation about this in the comments. Otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful week.